I'm going to show you how to change your rotors and your caliper brackets to the Big Brake kit. What you're looking at here, this has already been done here, so just disregard the fact that this is the larger than stock rotor. Just let's make an assumption here that these are all stock parts. For the purposes of showing how this goes, it makes no difference. So obviously, first thing I've done is I've taken off the wheel, and you want to remove this cotter pin here. So I usually use a pair of needle nose to bend that down. Then I take a pair of dikes and come in here, and I can just kind of use this to kind of lever it out. And then you'll remove the axle nut here, and then you'll want to take off the caliper plate, and that's going to be a 13mm bolt here, another 13mm bolt there, and pull that away. And then you can go ahead and remove the hub here. I've removed those two 13mm bolts, and now caliper and its mounting plate will just set aside here. And now I can take off the nut, pull the hub off. Nut's been removed, and now at this point I can slide this off. There's a washer here and a cone bearing, just a wheel bearing. Those will probably pop off. These could be a little tight. You may have to really tug on them. You can sometimes take a large flathead screwdriver, very carefully pry against here, or you can take like a rubber mallet or a dead blow mallet and just give it a little tap, and this will come off. Got my hub off. I'm going to go ahead and pull this bearing out. By the way, now is a good time when you get back to reassembly. If you want to grease your wheel bearings, great time to do it. Now we're going to flip this over, and we're going to remove these screws here. Now, these are Loctited in and extremely tight from the factory. You run the risk of stripping out those Allen heads if you do not use a torch and heat them up. I just use a propane torch. I'll show you here. Give a little heat right in these areas here where they mount up. Don't heat it here because you're going to burn this seal and this bearing. You're going to heat it up on the sides right at those bosses where the bolts thread in there. I'll show you. Got my torch. I'm just going to heat these one by one. You're just looking for about 30, 40 seconds or so. And then ideally you'd have an impact driver. This is a 6mm hex. Ideally you have an impact. If you don't, you can use just an Allen wrench. Wear some gloves. This is going to be hot right here, but with an impact at this point, you can just set that in there and this will come right out. Now, again, I've already changed these, so I don't have the issue where they're super tight because I did not Loctite them back in. But these will be tight. As long as you got some heat on there, they'll be fine. If they're still stubborn, you need a little more heat, okay? But don't overdo it. You don't need to cook these things. You don't need to get that cherry red. Just add the heat until these will come off. Work your way around the other three, and then this rotor will come right off. Got all my bolts out. At this point, you could remove your rotor. Again, this is the Big Brake rotor, but you'd just be removing your stock rotor. And I've got a brand new Big Brake rotor here. That'll just slip right there. And then it's just the reverse. Now, I haven't Loctited these because I've been doing prototyping, going back and forth. I would recommend a little bit of blue Loctite right on the last couple threads there, and then go ahead and tighten these down. Thing I want to mention is these bolts are shoulder bolts. See, they've got a shoulder right there, and that shoulder fits nicely in these holes in the rotor. So I would do all of the bolts loose. Like, don't torque them one by one. Just set them all down, get them seated, and then go around and torque them. That just makes sure that the rotor's clocked in and sitting on those shoulders just right. Okay, I've got all those done. The hub at this point is complete. You can go ahead and throw your bearing back in. Again, this is a good time if you'd like. Go ahead and grease your bearings. Last thing we need to do here is swap out the factory plates with these new extension plates. Again, I've already got this one on here, but I'll just go ahead and go through the process to show you, just make an assumption here that this would have been the factory plate. It's the same thing, it's just a little shorter. So what you do is you come over here and you'll see there's a hex right there. And you'll go ahead and get you an Allen wrench in there, and it's basically a nut effectively, and you'll just take that off. All right, I've loosened that, and if I just go ahead and take it off, set that down here. I'm trying to do this with one hand. I don't have a helper today. Now what we can do is we can just carefully pull the plate off. There's a pin down there that fits in that bore right there. We can just kind of pull it off and get it out of the way. And you'll end up with your plate that looks like this. Again, this is already the aftermarket extension plate. Yours will be a little bit narrower. But then what you want to do is take a 12mm wrench, and you want to, it just taps into the plate. You want to just take that pin off there. Again, it's a 12mm wrench. Okay, I've taken that pin off. You grab your new plate, which again, it's the same because of the way I'm doing this, but and then we'll just thread that in there. There is a split lock washer. I would recommend, again, a little bit of blue Loctite. And then go ahead and torque that down. And you end up with that. And now it's just a reverse going back in. You will notice this hole at the top has a flat spot. It's a D-shaped hole. And that's because this pin has a flat right there. So when you put this plate on there, you'll need to clock that pin to get it to index to that D. And then fit that in that other bore on the caliper there. I've got everything slipped back in there. Last thing I need to do is put that nut back in place, torque it down. Got that installed there. Now it's time to go ahead. This is done. It's time to go ahead and stick the hub with the rotor on the axle there. These may be a little tight going back on too, and if that's the case, just give them a little tap. But that'll go in there. And then now at this point, this caliper can go back on here. Now you may need to compress the pistons. If you've had some brake wear on your factory rotor, they're going to be a little too close. Plus the aftermarket rotor here, our Big Brake rotor, is a little bit thicker than the factory rotor. So not uncommon that you'll have to compress those pistons a little bit to get this on. But once you get that on, then you just slip it in place, put the bolts back in, and you're good. Okay, I've got this bolted back up. I'd use some blue Loctite there. That's in place, and there we go. So now I just need to go ahead and put the axle nut back on, throw a cotter pin in there, put your wheel back on, and you're good to go. All right, got my cotter pin in place. Everything is set. Now, when you go out there and you ride this thing for the first time, your brake's got to be broken in. It's going to take a little bit for everything to seat. If you've used your factory brakes for a while and you're running the pads that you were using, they're going to be grooved a little bit differently. This is a brand new rotor, so it's just going to take a little bit to break them in. You don't need to change your pads. If you want to get some new pads, get with your dealer. You certainly can. But just expect that for the first little bit, you're not going to get maximum braking performance because these aren't set in yet. Expect that to take a little bit. It took me about, I don't know, 20 miles worth of driving with just average amount of stopping to get these seated in properly. So just be aware of that. Eventually they will seat in real nice and you'll get really good braking performance. Now, you probably have been looking at this suspension wondering what the heck is that? This is a long travel suspension that we're working on. I'm trying to get this put together in a kit and make it available. So I know I should have mentioned that at first. You probably are all sitting there looking at that going, what the heck is that? That is a long travel that I'm working on for the Forrester 4 Plus here, which is what I have. And I've probably got about 100 miles on this prototype here, and it is phenomenal. We use a longer shock. We get twice the amount of suspension travel that you get with factory, and this front end rides butter smooth. It is super nice, but more info on that coming at a later time. Just wanted to kind of go over the install. Hey, any of you out there that have changed brakes or rotors on a car, you don't need this video. You're going to figure this out, but this is for y'all that maybe haven't done that before. You're not familiar. It's a real easy job. This should take you, honestly, from the time you jack up the cart till you set it back down, probably should take you about 30 minutes, 45 minutes if you're working a little slow. But there you go. Enjoy your new brake kit. These brakes are awesome.